Catholic Answers Live, the program where you participate with your questions about apologetics and evangelization, including the most important theological, spiritual, moral, and social issues facing the world today. Call now with your question for today's guest. Toll free 1-888-31-TRUTH. That's 888-318-7884. Now, from San Diego, Catholic Answers Live.
And welcome back to this live edition of Catholic Answers Live. Hope your weekend was marvelous. This is Patrick Coffin. Happy to be with you for another day of high-octane, high-accessible, high-formative power Catholic radio. In the second hour, we're going to talk to one of my favorite priest scholars. He's a scripture scholar and a natural-born writer and teacher. His name is Father Francis Martin. He is a priest of the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., and just an eminent scripture scholar. We're going to talk about sort of a hot topic today because the end of the world has at least recently been in the news. That is the Antichrist. Who was the Antichrist? Was it a person? Is it an idea? Is it an individual? We'll kind of unmask the Antichrist in the second hour. Look forward to your calls to Father Francis Martin. 1-888-31-TRUTH is that toll-free phone number. 1-888-318-7884. We are taping today for our YouTube channel. If you go to Catholic.com, you will see on the right-hand side of the page a YouTube logo leading to our link to our YouTube page. It's youtube.com/CatholicCom. And our video media department do a great job of editing portions of the show according to topics, so you can quickly do a keyword search and find pretty much whatever you want from our in-camera studio. And showing his eminently chiseled face and otherwise good looks and super brain is the author of a new book by Catholic Answers. It's called 101 Quick Questions with Catholic Answers, Marriage, Divorce, and Annulment. He's also a staff apologist here and a contributor to This Rock magazine. And he's a man who once was scared to death, half scared to death, twice. Jim Blackburn, welcome back, sir.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. That means then I'm only a quarter alive now?
I don't know. There are three kinds of people in the world. Three. Those who are good at math, those who aren't.
Okay.
So I have no idea. All right, marriage, divorce, and annulment. You get a lot of these questions on the air, and I'm not that surprised that you chose this particular selection of themes from the forums and from the magazine to collate into this current book. Have you always been interested in marriage and divorce and annulment and explaining it to people, or is that something you just fell into haphazard?
Well, it's something that became very important, I guess, to me as I became an apologist here at Catholic Answers. Mm-hmm. When I started here 7-some-odd years ago, it became apparent to me very early on that probably the most common topic that we get questions on, mm-hmm. Especially from Catholics, is the topic of marriage and all things related, annulments, divorces, right. Weddings, remarriages, all these kinds of things together. What does the church teach? What are the church's laws concerning these? And, questions from, can I attend this wedding, to, is this going to be a valid marriage, to, mm-hmm. If I'm in this situation, I'm divorced, is it okay to receive communion? When can a person get an annulment? What are grounds for an annulment? Mm-hmm. When can a person get remarried? All these kinds of questions come up again and again, and they still do. We still get these kinds of questions, not only in the magazine, not only here on Catholic Answers Live, but on the apologist line as well. We get these questions almost every day. We'll talk to somebody with a question like that. So I chose that topic for that reason, because I know these are questions that people are asking, mm-hmm. and this is a great opportunity for them to get the answers to them.
The only organization on earth, religious or secular, that believes that marriage is indissoluble, one man and one woman, for life, is the Catholic Church, correct?
Yes. In the case of a Christian marriage, a marriage between two baptized Christians, mm-hmm. that is a valid marriage that has been consummated, that's what the church teaches. And that's based on his words, that what God has joined together, let not man put asunder. Mm-hmm. The church recognizes there is no human power that can dissolve a valid, sacramental, consummated marriage.
What's the basic definition of an annulment? And for those who've never had the question answered, how does a decree of nullity differ from a divorce?
Well, an annulment is sometimes secularly, I guess, called a Catholic divorce. And that's just a misnomer completely. It's not a Catholic divorce. The Church does recognize that a couple who are married, validly married, there may come a time when a divorce, a civil divorce, might be necessary. A civil divorce, simply as that term civil implies, it takes care of things legally for them in the system in which they live, in the culture and the society in which they live. It does not, though, dissolve the marriage. They are still married in the eyes of God, in the eyes of the Church. They're still married. So they really are still husband and wife. So that civil divorce does not allow them to go on and marry other people. But it can be a necessary step. A couple who can't live together anymore for some reason or another. You've got an abusive spouse. You've got a philandering spouse. Something like this might make it necessary for the couple to separate. And then the divorce part might come in to take care of custody issues of the children, or to help secure assets and income situations and make things equitable for everybody in the long run. That may have to happen in the legal system, and that could be handled through a divorce.
As long as the person is willing to not get married again. That would be the rub, right?
That's right.
The problem is remarriage.
That's simply not an option. And a person cannot go into a civil divorce with the impression that this is going to free me to then go on and remarry someone else. It does not do that. However, if a person would like to submit the question of the validity of their marriage to the Church, so that the Church can look at it and determine, did a valid marriage ever come into existence or did it not? That's the annulment process. So the Church generally won't look at an annulment case unless a civil divorce has already happened. But once a civil divorce has happened, if one or the other of the spouses wishes to apply for an annulment, the Church can investigate it and determine, did a valid marriage come into existence on the wedding day or not? If it did, then again, nothing's changed. If it did not, then the Church is not changing anything as far as the marriage goes. It's just the way we will look at it from that point on is that, well, what we thought was a marriage was not. It's clear that it was not, and that's a declaration of nullity.
What kinds of things are deal breakers, what are called diriment impediments? Obviously, the big ones are clear. You can't have been already married. You can't be an ordained priest or religious with vows and so on. You can't have been drunk the day you took your vows. But what are the more, the kinds of conditions that have really been articulated only in this or last generation, psychological things that really are deal breakers, but that may not be obvious at first? Well,
there are a couple of things that the Code of Canon Law addresses. For example, if a couple or one person or another murders a spouse with the intention to free himself or herself or someone to marry someone else.
I never thought about that. Hey, till death do us part.
Code of Canon Law actually includes a canon on that particular issue. The impediment of the inability to consummate a marriage, so impotence, which would be perpetual impotence that cannot be cured, rendering someone with the incapacity to complete a conjugal act. That would be an impediment to marriage. A person must be able to, at least capable of consummating marriage. Doesn't mean you necessarily have to ever consummate it, but a person must be capable of consummating a marriage for a valid marriage to come into existence.
To your knowledge, is there a female equivalent of that? Would it work for both genders?
Yes. There is such a thing as female. I'm not sure the correct terminology.
Okay, but it works both ways. Okay.
Yeah.
What about homosexuality?
Homosexuality of itself is not listed as an impediment to marriage, but if if someone who suffers from the inclination of homosexuality is going to enter into a valid marriage, obviously it's got to be with someone of the opposite sex. Gay marriage is not something that is a possibility. That's just not a reality at all. Yeah. But if a person who suffers from homosexuality, and there are different, my understanding is there are different levels of that, and some people who suffer from homosexuality also do have an inclination towards heterosexuality as well. And the appropriate thing there to do would be to resist the homosexual temptations and embrace the attraction to the same sex or to the opposite sex,
Right.
and then could possibly go on somebody in a situation like that. It's we've had questions before about if somebody went into a marriage not knowing that their spouse suffered from a same-sex inclination at some level or not, could that fact that was not disclosed be a potential annulment?
Right, if it was severe enough and so on.
Yeah, and that's a possibility. That's something that I can't sit here and determine for somebody. I'm not a canon lawyer. I need to make that clear up front. I am familiar with canon law and a lot of the commentary on it, but some of these cases need to be to receive the attention they deserve. A canon lawyer needs to look at them.
Well, one thing we've got to look at is break time. We'll take one now, and we'll come back after these words to speak with Thomas and David and Michael, and whoever picks up the next line that's open. 1-888-31-TRUTH is the toll-free phone number. Jim Blackburn, author of Marriage, Divorce, and Annulment, 101 Quick Questions with Catholic Answers. We're talking about marriage, divorce, and annulment here on the broadcast. 1-888-31-TRUTH. My name's Patrick Coffin. Keep it right here on Catholic Answers Live. We'll be back.
From Detroit to Des Moines, Catholic Answers Live.
Marriage preparation is an important time in a young couple's life. As the date approaches, there are bound to be plenty of questions. Where do you go for the answers? There are no answers like Catholic Answers. And now we're pleased to introduce 2 volumes of our brand new 101 Quick Questions with Catholic Answers series, Sexuality and Marriage, Divorce, and Annulment. Phone 888-291-8000 or log on to Catholic.com for details. There's a great deal of confusion about the God-given institution of marriage. In 101 Quick Questions with Catholic Answers, Marriage, Divorce, and Annulment, you'll learn the do's and don'ts of both Catholic and non-Catholic weddings, the distinctions between a valid marriage and a sacramental marriage, and a lot more. A newly married couple also desperately needs to hear the Catholic Church's teachings on human sexuality. 101 Quick Questions with Catholic Answers, Sexuality, highlights the beauty and goodness in human sexuality, the important part chastity plays both inside and outside of marriage, the procreative and unitive ends of marriage, and much more. Both of the 101 Quick Questions with Catholic Answers books are the perfect complement for marriage preparation classes, and bulk pricing is available. They're available individually or packaged together for a special discounted price. Phone 888-291-8000 or log on to Catholic.com.
The Catholic Answers Minute. I'm Father Vincent Serpa. In John 16:33, the disciples said to Jesus, "Now you are talking plainly, and not in any figure of speech. Now we realize that you know everything, and that you do not need to have anyone question you. Because of this, we believe that you came from God." Jesus answered them, "Do you believe now? Behold, the hour is coming and has arrived, when each of you will be scattered to his own home, and you will leave me alone." They thought that they had understood, but our Lord says, not so fast. He is the eternal mystery after all. We don't always feel all that comfortable with mystery. We want it all out there. Eventually, the disciples learned that trusting His love for them was enough. Not all of us are quite there yet. We need more time before the tabernacle and the crucifix. I'm Father Vincent Serpa for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
Call now with your question. 888-318-7884. This is Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to the show. Taking your calls on marriage, divorce, and annulment. What is a sacramental marriage? What is a natural law marriage? What is indissolubility? We're covering it all with author Jim Blackburn. The book, I'll just hold it up to the camera, is called, I say camera because we're filming today for our YouTube channel, Marriage, Divorce, and Annulment, 101 Quick Questions with Jim Blackburn. Now, here's the book, and his head is there, visible, I guess, from the other. Is that your good side, Jim? Comfortable with being shot from the left-hand side?
Do I have a good side? I don't know.
I don't know that. Well, I have like a horn I have to cover up. All right. Well, we've got callers. So want to go straight to them?
Yeah, let's do.
Let's speak, first of all, to Thomas in Santa Ana, California, listening on our favorite website, Catholic.com. Hello, Thomas.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for taking my call. I just had a really short question. Pretend there was a couple who was married for many years, but over time, they gradually stopped talking. don't sleep together anymore, don't communicate anymore, and one partner even moves to a different country. Is this a sin if the couple is still nice and polite to each other, but don't ever communicate to each other anymore?
Nice and polite to each other, but no communication?
Yes.
You see why I'm asking, Thomas? If they have no communication, how can they be nice or rude to each other? If they're
not fighting anymore.
Okay, no contact at all?
No.
Okay, so is it a sin to do that, Jim?
Well, it might be. It might be the occasion of sin for one or both of the spouses. A marriage must be ordered to the good of the spouses. And if they separate and live far apart and don't communicate with each other anymore, it could be that that's not for the good of the spouses. There could be something that's missing there that should be there, that is being freely excluded by one or the other of the spouses. On the other hand, we mentioned the case of separation and divorce earlier. It could be that maybe one of the spouses is culpable of something that makes it where they cannot live together anymore, so the other spouse is an innocent victim of that. Wouldn't be sin involved for that particular spouse. And I suppose there could be a situation that we could dream up that there is some necessity for them to live apart for a time. It could be a number of reasons we could dream up to say that this is what they need to do. Mm-hmm. Maybe legal reasons. Maybe one of them wasn't in this country legally, and the other, or maybe one is wrongly convicted of a crime and sent to prison somewhere. Who knows? Then, in an occasion like that, a situation like that, it could be that neither of them are at fault or culpable of something that would result in a sin, would be a sin for either of them. So you would need to really have the details here. I would recommend, if someone, for example, is in that situation, their spouse is gone, living in another country, there's no communication, and they're concerned that sin is involved, talk to a confessor, consult a spiritual director, and sit down and try to hash this out with all the details so that it can be determined whether confession is necessary or some sort of correction is necessary in that life.
So, Jim, romantic attachments with other people, attempting to marry someone else, those would be sinful.
Yes, you mean for this couple?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're still married.
Still married.
Presuming
even if on different planets.
Presuming that a
no
marriage,
contact, no Morse code, nothing.
Presuming that this was a valid marriage, then they are still married, and the distance between them doesn't then make it acceptable for them to do what they otherwise couldn't do if they were still living together, such as become romantically attached to someone else or have that type of relationship with someone else.
There it is, Thomas. How was that?
Oh, thank you so much.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.
All right. 19 after the hour. This is Catholic Answers Live. Jim Blackburn is our guest. We're talking about marriage, divorce, and annulment. His latest book, a collation of 101 quick questions with Catholic answers. Pretty much soup to nuts. I went through the book, Jim. I couldn't think up a question that was not covered, at least sideways. So, congrats.
Yeah, and I was able to choose those questions from a much larger pool of questions. So I was able to get something representative from just about everything I could think of, too, that I thought people might be interested in asking.
So these are the creme de la question.
Yeah.
I think that's a Spanish-French meld. And with that, I will segue gracefully to David in Pensacola, listening on Divine Word Radio, 12:30 a.m. Hello, David.
Hi. I've got one question. I got a hypothetical one. If two people were married 10 years ago and the male goes to prison, so they divorce, thinking the male's never going to get out again, and the male happens to get out 10 years later, and they start living together, are they living in sin?
Well, it wouldn't seem to me as though they were. Now, I would like to...
neither one of them married again. Okay. They just simply were separated through divorce.
Baptized Catholics, David? Both?
Well, one is a fallen away Catholic and one is not.
Okay.
Not right. Catholic. They're both baptized.
Okay. Now, presuming that the marriage was valid, however many years ago it was that they initially got married, assuming that was a valid marriage, then the the separation that occurred because of the prison sentence, the divorce, the civil divorce, none of that ended the marriage. So in the eyes of God, in the eyes of the church, the couple are still married. In fact, if they are both baptized, then and they consummated the marriage, then this would be a sacramental marriage, sacramental consummated marriage that is not dissoluble. So nothing but death will dissolve that marriage. So if
even just an old courthouse marriage, huh? Not a church wedding or anything.
Well,
just a regular court.
That could throw a wrench into this if at the time they got married, one of them or both of them were Catholics. If that's the case, then that marriage would likely not have been a valid marriage because they were obliged to marry in the Catholic Church or the form of marriage that the Catholic Church prescribes, or get a dispensation to marry, say, in another church. And if that didn't happen, if one or both were Catholics and they failed to do that and just went to the Justice of the Peace and got married, then it's very likely that is not a valid marriage, was not back then, and is not today. And so that would be the reverse situation. And if there's nothing else, neither one of them have ever attempted marriage with anyone else, and they would like to be married today, it should be a very simple process. They can simply come into the church and ask for what's called a convalidation. Convalidation takes what is otherwise recognized as a civil marriage and then recognizes it as a valid marriage in the church, recognized by God as well. So it's possible that they could, if that's the situation that they're in, they could receive a convalidation. And I'd recommend that they contact their local pastor to get the process started for that. It could be very simple.
David in Pensacola, thanks for the call. It's 22 after the hour. You're listening to Catholic Answers Live. And now we're about to listen to Tricia in San Francisco, California, listening on Immaculate Heart Radio, 1260 AM. Hey, Tricia.
Hi, I have a question, and it's concerning a couple I know, so I won't give out names. They were married for over 15 years, had children. They separated for 7. One spouse cheated on the other one, and they had relations before they got married, meaning they were intimate before they got married. If one of them wanted to get an annulment, would they have any hope for that, considering the circumstances?
Well, there are a couple of things that...
they're both Catholic and married in Catholic Church.
Okay. You mentioned the fact that they lived together, I guess, before they got married?
Correct.
That doesn't seem as though that would be... that's not an impediment to marriage. If a couple lives together, they can still get married.
Okay.
So that,
what about the cheating?
Well, the cheating... if a valid marriage came into existence on the wedding day, then that cheating would not invalidate it. There's nothing that can invalidate a marriage that is valid on the wedding day.
That's curious because I remember reading about what Jesus said in the Bible that he gave Moses divorce because he knew the hardness of people's hearts. But then he said, pretty much the marriage is valid unless there's some sort of unfaithfulness. I forgot the exact word.
Tricia, you asked a really great question, and I'm glad, because if you didn't, I would have. Except in the case of unchastity, Matthew 19, right, Jim? What does that mean?
Right. And what Jesus says there, it depends on the translation of the scriptures, which version you're reading. But if we go back to the Greek, in Matthew's gospel, there, the Greek word is porneia. Porneia from the same root of the word we get the word pornography from, and it's an indication that there's something going on that shouldn't be going on. There's some sexual relationship of some sort that shouldn't be going on. So sometimes you'll see this translated generically as unchastity. Sometimes you'll see the translator trying to pinpoint what it is, such as sometimes it'll be
unfaithfulness,
adultery, or something else. Many scripture scholars believe that Jesus was talking about unchastity between the spouses themselves. In other words, a couple who got married and came together in a conjugal way when that's something that they should never have done. For example, they're too closely related to each other. So it's not chaste for them to be having relations with each other. It's not chaste for them to be married to each other. And that's what is largely recognized as this, that unchastity is not unchastity outside the marriage, it's unchastity within the marriage. So if that's the case, then we can't just say lay down a blanket law here and say that, well, if one spouse cheats on the other, that's grounds for a divorce that would then go on and dissolve the marriage, because that's the only place Jesus mentions this, and he seems to mention it to his audience. Matthew seems to bring this out because Matthew's audience is a Jewish audience, and this was a situation that was happening in the Jewish culture at the time, and so it seems to have been brought out in Matthew's gospel, whereas it's not brought out in the other gospels, and Paul doesn't bring it out either. Paul does not list any sort of an exception. Once a marriage is valid and sacramental and consummated, nothing can dissolve that marriage.
I always thought sex sort of symbolizes becoming one with a person. So if somebody's married, they want that person, they go out and have multiple partners outside that marriage. Aren't they becoming one with these other people and destroying the marriage?
Well, ontologically perhaps, but it does not make a deal breaker for marriage.
It doesn't dissolve the original marriage, no.
Coming up next, more of your questions on Catholic Answers Live, Marriage, Divorce, and Annulment with Jim Blackburn. We'll be right back.
Pressure on our daughters today to look the part or to fit in is tremendous. As a former America's Next Top Model, Catholic Answers Leah Darrow has devoted herself to speaking to crowds of high school girls across the country. Leah's journey in faith has been a battle at times, but has left her with a refreshed and hopeful perspective on the world.
I felt loved. I really felt loved. And that was huge. I had never really felt that way in those terms before. Full, encompassing love. And that I really was forgiven. It all went away.
Phone 619-387-7200 to schedule a talk at your high school by the dynamic and inspiring Leah Darrow. She shares how modesty inspired others to look at her and treat her differently than before. Phone 619-387-7200 and let Leah Darrow inspire the young women in your community, including the ones you love.
We know you'd love to have more than 2 hours of Catholic Answers Live each weekday, but even after we've gone off the air, the work of Catholic Answers continues. Around the clock, 24/7, we're on the battle lines working to build up the church by providing free materials like Pillar of Fire and our Essential Catholic Survival Guide to those in the military to help strengthen their faith in difficult situations, sending free This Rock magazine subscriptions to priests and seminarians, shipping complimentary materials to prisoners, sending speakers out across the country with their messages on apologetics, evangelization, and chastity, running the world's largest online Catholic discussion forums, and a lot more. As you can imagine, and as you would want it, Catholic Answers work never ends. Visit Catholic.com to learn more about what goes on inside Catholic Answers.
Catholic Answers Live continues. Mr. Jim Blackburn talking about marriage, divorce, and annulment. We're up, man. Welcome back to the show. Don't miss the next hour with Father Francis Martin. We're going to talk about the Antichrist in hour 2. We continue our conversation with you, dear listener, and also with Jim. I just wanted to kind of add a little caboose to the train of Trisha's call earlier, Jim. One thing that the verse in Matthew 19 can't be, it's verse 9 of Matthew 19. The Jerusalem Bible says that, the Ignatius Bible. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for unchastity and marries another commits adultery, and he who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. The disciples' reaction to that totally nullifies the possibility that he's creating a loophole, because they say, if such is the case of a man with his wife, it's expedient not to marry. Now, if he was laying out a loophole, that question would make no sense.
Yeah, that's right. Because then you could simply have, if the loophole was adultery, you could simply end the divorce or end the marriage with adultery.
Yep.
And so, I mean, clearly that's not what it is, and we know that that's not the way it's ever been understood in the church, at least not in the Catholic Church. Now, there have been other churches more recently, other communities who have, tried to build some of this divorce language into this and believe that, and they will in their own churches allow divorces, but if the marriage is really a valid, sacramental, consummated marriage, that divorce is not going to dissolve it. I wanted to mention, too, for the previous caller, that if you do have a situation, and this is something I didn't get to address, we didn't quite make it there, but if she mentioned a spouse who cheated on the other spouse. I mentioned that cannot dissolve the marriage, but it could be evidence that a valid marriage never came into existence. For example, if you've got a couple who get married, and on the face of it, it seems as though it's a valid marriage, but then down the road, you've got one of the spouses not living up to his end of the bargain, not being faithful to his spouse.
Total serial philanderer.
Could be that he did not enter the marriage with the commitment that's required for a valid marriage to come into existence. So that is something that I would encourage a couple in that situation to apply for an annulment. Let a marriage tribunal in the church look at it and determine, did a valid marriage come into existence or not? Because if that evidence shows that, if it does point to that lack of commitment that's required for a marriage to come into existence, the church could possibly issue a declaration of nullity in that case, freeing the spouses to marry other people.
All right. Let's go to Maria now in Germantown, Maryland, listening on 1160 AM. Hello, Maria.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you for taking my call. My question is, I'm married to my husband through the state, and I think I heard at the beginning of your show that if you are baptized Catholic, both of you, then you have a valid marriage. So I wanted some clarity on what that means versus being married in the church, which is I'm slowly working towards getting married in the church, and I have not had communion for many years because of that.
Yeah.
So
let me clarify, if I could. Catholics have an obligation. The church obliges Catholics to certain things when it comes to marriage. Jesus gave First Peter and later all of the apostles the authority to bind and to loose. We read about that in Matthew 16 and Matthew 18. And with that authority, the church can enact certain laws for the benefit of us that we must follow. And there are certain marriage laws that, in the Code of Canon Law, that oblige us as Catholics, and if we fail to observe those laws, a valid marriage will not come into existence. So one of those laws, it requires that a Catholic either get married in the Catholic Church, is the phrase that we use, but what it really means is marries according to the form of marriage that the church requires, that the law requires. That ordinarily means that there's going to be a Catholic priest or a deacon as a witness for the church. There are going to be 2 more witnesses. It's ordinarily going to take place in a Catholic church. Those kinds of things are ordinarily required for a Catholic to validly get married. If a Catholic wants to get married another way, using another form of marriage, then that Catholic must get a dispensation from the bishop. That is ordinarily handled by the pastor. The pastor can get that dispensation, but if they fail to get that dispensation and they go and get married, say, by a justice of the peace, you mentioned being married by the state. If you're talking about getting married by a justice of the peace, and you were a Catholic at the time, or your husband was a Catholic at the time, and there was no dispensation issued from the bishop, then there's a question of the validity of the marriage right there. That's something that would need to be looked at. A canon lawyer could look at it, or you could submit it to the church. But if you're still married and you just want to be certain that your marriage is a valid marriage, then you can go to your local pastor, explain the situation, and it could be that convalidation is necessary, and that's a kind of a blessing of your marriage, as it's sometimes called, and that could solve the situation, could correct the situation and make your marriage certainly valid.
Does that cover it, Maria?
Yes, partially. I've already talked to the priest at my church. We've opened up a file to my husband and I for us to get married. I have some resistance on my husband's part because he's not a big practicing Catholic, and I am a cradle Catholic, as you say. Mm-hmm. I have not had communion for years, and it really hurts my soul. But him dragging his feet, I think I should, accept the blame. Also, I'm dragging my feet, and just years are passing by. It sounds like a validation could be easy, but I've already been talked about taking some steps, which would be going to some classes. He was married previously, which actually is a big thing, which I'd like to ask you in addition. His marriage previously, which he was divorced, and it was through the state. Does that make my case much harder, or are we still kind of like starting from scratch?
Well, he's never been a Catholic, is that right?
No, he was baptized, but he's not practicing.
Okay. Well, it could be then that his first marriage also was not a valid marriage, because if he got married outside the church, if he wasn't a practicing Catholic at the time, he would still have been obligated by the church to get married in the church. So that the fact that he has done this twice now, it seems very likely to me that neither marriage is valid, and therefore all he would need to do in the first case is have what's called sometimes a documentary case annulment, where you just simply would need to document, or you could do it for him. Anyone could provide the evidence to the church that this is what they did, and therefore it was not a valid marriage, and the church would then recognize that to be the case, and that would free then him to go ahead and marry you. And then you would get what's called a convalidation. Now, you mentioned that he, as a non-practicing Catholic, maybe there are some issues with him cooperating in that. In cases,
dragging his feet, yeah,
okay.
Basically.
Well, depending on what that level of cooperation or in cooperation might be, there is a potential in many cases for the marriage to be ratified, if you will, to be validated in the eyes of the church, as long as he intends to continue consenting to the marriage. There's something that it might not require a new a new vow of consent from him, and that's called a ratification. That's something that is sometimes available to people if certain circumstances are present. So you might consider that too. Don't let him dragging his feet necessarily stall the process. He doesn't necessarily have to stall the process. And then one more thing. You mentioned that you aren't receiving communion, and I recognize that if you are in a marriage, you're in a situation that is not recognized by the church, not recognized by God, you're not receiving communion for that reason. What you could do is, cease living as husband and wife for a time. I don't mean you have to move out, but, stop with the conjugal relationship for a time. That's called practicing marital continence. Practice marital continence for a time until the situation can be resolved. If you're willing to do that, and your husband will cooperate with you on that, and if he loves you, he should, then you can go to confession and you can return to the Eucharist. And I would really encourage you to do that. It could help out with the process a lot.
Amen. How's that, Maria?
Okay. That's really great. Thank you so much for that information.
We'll keep you in our prayers in that situation. Sounds challenging. Call us back once it gets resolved, okay?
Okay, thanks so much.
All right,
God bless.
You too. 39 after the hour. This is Catholic Answers Live. Jim Blackburn joins us. His new book is called Marriage, Divorce, and Annulment. We are filming this for our YouTube channel. If you go to Catholic.com and click on the right-hand side, you'll see a YouTube icon. That is our YouTube channel. We've got dozens and dozens, becoming hundreds now, of selections of questions that you can watch and listen through our YouTube channel. Just hold up to the camera there so you get a look at the publication. It can be had at Catholic.com or by calling the order number, which is 1-888-291-8000, 1-888-291-8000. With that, we go to Warren, Michigan, and we say hi to Julia, listening on channel 130, EWTN Sirius Satellite Radio. Hey, Julia.
Hello.
Greetings.
Thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
Hi, Julia.
I love Catholic Answers. I'm calling because I'm a convert. I converted to the Catholic Church when I was married, at the direction of my Protestant pastor, by the way. He told me to convert if I was marrying a Catholic. But my sisters are still Protestant, and one of them was married and just recently got divorced. And I was very upset at the time when I heard about her getting a divorce, because she is a Christian, and I just couldn't understand how she was getting in, why she would do this.
Right. So
and
what
she told me,
Julie, I'm trying to balance your question with the people waiting. Maybe you can turn it into a question Jim can answer.
You betcha.
Thanks.
So I need to know if the situation is that she is getting divorced because her husband has always been a proponent of open marriage and has been trying to bring women into their household.
Yeah, Julia, how does he?
What should be my attitude towards my sister? How can I support her?
Julia, how does he define open marriage in light of I think it's a book by a couple called the O'Neills back in the 70s called Open Marriage. Does he mean, hey, you're free to date, I'm free to date? More or less, is that what
he means he wants 3 or 4 people in their bedroom every night.
Oh, well, not paying rent probably either.
Mm-hmm. No. Now, she's been refusing all this time, and now he's getting violent, and I think he's getting violent because he's laid off from work. He was an automotive engineer, and so she has got an injunction, put him out of the house, and has started divorce proceedings.
Okay. Well, it's understandable that she would want to do that. This could be one of those situations, whether they are validly married or not, that's a situation that those are circumstances that she can't agree to, and I can understand then why she might have to get a civil divorce in a situation like that.
Right.
The civil divorce will not end a valid marriage if a valid marriage exists. So what she will need to do before she can consider marrying again, or before we could support her in getting married again, would be to prove that the marriage was not valid. Now, it could be if he entered into the marriage with this open marriage mentality, and it's something that he's always required, and then that would seem to me to be a very possible ground for the marriage to be dissolved, or not the marriage to be dissolved, but for a declaration of nullity to be issued.
Mm-hmm. Right.
On the other hand, if this is something that came about later in the marriage, then that would not lead me down that road. That would make me think, well, he's somebody who didn't like being married to one woman anymore, and so he chose to bring this element into the marriage. And while I can see that as being grounds for a civil divorce and separation of the couple and such, it wouldn't, to me, indicate that the marriage was null from the beginning. And therefore, if this was a marriage that I once recognized as valid, and the church recognizes valid, and the church will continue to recognize as valid, then I don't know how I could support someone in that situation going on and attempting to marry someone else without submitting this to the church to check the validity or nullity of the marriage according to what the church would say about it.
Julia, that's a toughie. Obviously, your care for your sister comes through, and we'll keep her in that situation in our prayers as well. Thank you for that. We're running a little bit late on our last break of the broadcast with Jim Blackburn. We're talking about his latest book. First book, right?
Yes, first one.
You celebrity, you. Marriage, Divorce, and Annulment's the name of it. Show it to the YouTube camera. And we'll be back speaking with MJ and Matt and Patrick and the others. God willing, we'll try to get to as many of you as we can in the closing moments of Catholic Answers Live. We'll be back after these words.
We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live. No other institution on the face of the earth treats marriage with such sacredness and dignity as the Catholic Church. You may not have the time to study all 111 marriage-related canons in the Church's law books, but you can still get firmly grounded in them. Order Catholic Answers' brand new book, 101 Quick Questions with Catholic Answers, Marriage, Divorce, and Annulment by our staff apologist Jim Blackburn. Make sure you and those you know treat marriage with the dignity and respect that God originally intended for this sacred institution. Order 101 Quick Questions with Catholic Answers. Available right now when you dial 888-291-8000 or log on to our website, Catholic.com.
Poor Banished Children tells the riveting story of Warda, who's captured from Malta by Barbary pirates and sold into slavery in Muslim North Africa. A new historical novel by an award-winning European author, Poor Banished Children shows one woman's struggle to survive her brutal and demeaning circumstances without submitting to total and permanent enslavement. Can Warda gain her freedom without losing her own soul? Poor Banished Children, available at Catholic bookstores at Ignatius.com or by calling 800-651-1531.
Is a Catholic Answer speaker coming to your town? Check out our seminar calendar at Catholic.com. Call now with your question. 888-318-7884. This is Catholic Answers Live.
Yes, indeed, we're back. Let's waste no time and go post-haste to Eugene, Oregon, listening on Ave Maria radio app. We say hi to Lori. Hey, Lori, welcome to the show.
Thank you. My question is about whether after an annulment it means that children are born out of wedlock. Also, I'm kind of curious about what kind of fees are involved.
Okay, for an annulment. The answer to your first question, I think you're talking about illegitimacy. If a couple got married or presumed that they were married, and then they had children, and then they later got divorced and an annulment, that means they were never married when the kids were born. So does that mean the kids were illegitimate? Well, it's important to point out here and recognize that legitimacy is is really more a civil term. It's a legal term that's used in societies where inheritance is determined by legitimacy in some cases, where an obvious case of this might be the throne. In a monarchy, it may be required that it go to a legitimate heir and those kinds of things. Legitimacy isn't something that really has any bearing on our culture, and it's certainly nothing that has any bearing in the eyes of the church or in the eyes of God. So there is no concern for the children in this case if a marriage is declared to be null. So that's a non-issue. As far as the costs for annulment, your second question, they vary from diocese to diocese. You can, if you're looking to apply for an annulment, you generally may have more than just one option available to you. You can apply in the diocese where you got married, or if you live in a different diocese when you got divorced, you could apply for an annulment there, or wherever one or either of the spouses are living at the present time. An annulity case can be brought in either of those dioceses. So there are options available if someone's looking to get an annulment and wanting to keep the cost down. They might check with the various different venues and see what the costs are associated there. However, wherever a person applies for an annulment, the church is not going to turn someone away because they can't afford it. If someone is going to apply for an annulment and the costs are more than they can bear, the church isn't going to then reject the case or turn the person away. The church will still consider the case and still proceed with it, and somehow absorb those costs or help the person with a payment plan or something in order to make it something that's bearable on the person applying for the annulment.
Dr. Ed Peters gives a kind of a range, somewhere between 200 and 1,000, sometimes a bit more, sometimes even less. Depends on how complicated it is, how many interviews. Right. And the tribunal will tell you up front what the costs are.
Yes. And I do know, I've heard from many different dioceses, and it does seem to vary quite a bit from the low hundreds to over $1,000
4 digits,
in some cases.
Right.
Yeah.
Hope that's a help, Lori.
Okay. It is. Thanks so very much.
All right. Appreciate your call. 49 after the hour, we'll go straight to Detroit, Michigan, listening on 990 AM WDEO Radio. We say hi to MJ. Welcome, MJ.
Hey, Patrick. Hey, Jim. How you guys doing?
Good. Welcome.
Doing well, thanks.
Thank you. I've got a quick question. Kind of a specific example. If you have a couple, one is a baptized Catholic, the other is a evangelical, has never been a Catholic, married outside of the church, civil marriage in a courtroom, that type of thing. Say you've got a situation where the non-Catholic spouse begins having an affair and doesn't desire to get out of that affair. What are the options for the Catholic spouse? in that context, would he or she be able to potentially get an annulment and be remarried, or would that marriage still be valid even if the one partner chooses to remain outside of the marriage?
Got it, Jim.
Yeah, and MJ, it seems to me that would not be a valid marriage because the Catholic person married a non-Catholic Christian outside the Catholic Church. You said like a justice of the peace type wedding, and that's not going to be it's not going to be valid unless the Catholic got permission or a dispensation from the bishop in order to, it's called a dispensation from form, so that he didn't have to observe the Catholic form of marriage. A bishop, to my knowledge, isn't going to issue a dispensation for that so that you could go to a justice of the peace. I mean, he may issue that to get married in her church rather than get married in your Catholic church, but that's not what happened here. It sounds to me like the church was ignored, and the authority of the church was simply not recognized when this marriage was entered into, and the Catholic had an obligation to do that. So that being the case, it would seem to me as though a valid marriage probably never came into existence, and if there's problems with the marriage now and the couple are separating or divorcing, it would be pretty easy for the Catholic in this case, or the other one, if the other spouse wants to marry a Catholic, to go to the Catholic Church and get an annulment or have it looked at for, I mentioned this earlier, a documentary case annulment, where you just simply document that you were Catholic, you got married outside the church, and therefore it wasn't valid. Mm-hmm. Now, I would point out here, Patrick, too, that there have been some issues over the years. That there was at one point in 1983 when the Code of Canon Law came out, there was the issue of a Catholic formally defecting from the faith, and that would somehow play into this as well, whether they were bound by the law of the church in regard to this. Those laws have pretty much been removed by Pope Benedict, but if we're talking about marriages that happened between 1983 and now, I'd recommend getting the opinion of a canon lawyer on this, because some of that could play into this as well.
MJ, that was a little complicated case. It's hard for Jim to know all the specifics on the ground, but we do our best. We appreciate it. Time for one more call. Let it be Matt in Indianapolis. Welcome, Matt.
Hi.
Hey, we just held up the welcome, Matt.
Oh.
You're on the air. Thank you.
I have my first question was actually just answered, so thank you for that. Second, I might have misheard earlier.
You got 10 seconds, Matt.
All right. Is it under the vows of obedience for a priest to deny someone getting married because they're cohabitating?
Good question.
A priest can, for a number of reasons, refuse to marry a couple if he believes that it's not in their best interest to get married, because of something like that. If they are that could be one of the reasons that a priest chooses to not marry a couple. Yes, to answer your question in the short amount of time we've got, a priest could make that determination. Yes. That may not be all that there was to it. There could be more to it than that. I'm sure a priest considers every couple a unique case, but a priest can make that determination in some cases. Yes.
Matt in Indianapolis, hope that was a help. I'm just so sorry we didn't get to all the callers. People waited patiently, but tell you what, consolation prize is actually the first prize. Just get the book. It's literally pocket size. It's called 101 Quick Questions with Catholic Answers. It's called Marriage, Divorce, and Annulment. I'll show the beautiful cover to the camera there. You can get it at 888-291-8000 or go to Catholic.com. That's 888-291-8000 for that book. Thank you, Jim Blackburn.
You're welcome,
Sir.
Patrick Coffin. Thank you for having me.
All right. We'll talk to you real soon. See you in the hallway.
All right.
Coming up next, warming up in the bullpen, Father Francis Martin, scripture scholar extraordinaire, is going to talk about the man of sin, the Antichrist. Is he a history figure in the future? Are there precedents? We'll learn that and much more with Father Francis Martin in Hour 2. See you after these words.